Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Sunday. It's my joy and honor and pleasure to be here with you today. Today is St. Patrick's Day, so the only thing I had was a Christmas hat, but I do have green. So, St. Patrick's Day. I looked up St. Patrick in the second half of the 5th century, when he was 16 years old. A group of Irish raiders entered into England, where he lived, and captured him and other people and brought them back to Ireland as slaves. So he was a slave for 6 years in Ireland, starting when he was 16 years old. And he managed to escape back to England by boat. And while he was back in England, he had a series of revelries, spiritual revelries. And in one of these revelries, in a dream, he dreamed that the people of Ireland were petitioning him to return to reveal the spiritual things that he had experienced while as a slave and back in England. And so he resisted, and eventually he went back to Ireland, spent the rest of his life spreading Christianity throughout Ireland, baptizing people and preaching, and almost being arrested a few times, almost being killed a few times. And that's what elevated him to sainthood. He is personally responsible for Christianity in Ireland. He's the guy. He is the one who spread the whole thing and made it all happen. St. Patrick. That's why we drink green beer. So, yes. So here we are. Drink a green beer and toast St. Patrick for following the Spirit. Whatever you think of Christianity, Christianity is good. All religions are good when they're in their positive side. When religions become political and begin to try to control people and push their religious views on top of you, who perhaps don't believe in some of the edicts from that particular religion, that's why I believe evangelical Christians are a very dangerous breed. Aside from that, St. Patrick, blessings to you. But today we are talking about something much more cosmic and deep and amazing than that. The brain itself. This amazing little 3-pound structure is probably the most complex and amazing thing in the whole universe. It sits inside your head in about this position, fairly large, related to the size of your head, encased in bone, the skull. You know me, I've got my medical level model of the brain that comes apart in, I think, 24 pieces, and we'll delve into that a bit. But this structure, this structure with 2 hemispheres and various lobes, it comes apart also in a big suture that's right along in this zone. It's divided with a major suture that comes across this way, called the central sulcus. Um, the real brain is surprising. It's much more soft and gelatinous than you would expect. It's very squishy. It's not at all like the models that you have. You know, when you have a model of the brain, because usually most people's experience of a brain is some kind of a model. This is a very sophisticated medical model of the brain, and very expensive. Um, but you can see that this sort of rubberized thing that's fairly solid is very, very different than holding a real brain, which is very soft and gelatinous. Stiff gelatinous bowl of Jello is about its consistency. A bit more stiff than Jello, but not by much. So it's very strange and delicate and weird. When I was, first when I was going to school and learning about the brain and having to memorize all these structures of the brain, and how I got through it was by illustrating it, and then the illustrations burned it in my brain, and then I sold those illustrations to fellow students as study guides, and partially put myself through school that way. And then at a certain point, when the academics were over and went into clinical science, one of the first classes in clinical science was human dissection. So I actually dissected a brain. Now you had and dissected cadavers. So we were exposed to real bodies in black bags that we had to use scalpels to cut them open and dissect open different muscle groups and tendons and ligaments and organs and glands, and on a real body that had been donated to science. There's some just crazy stories about that, as you can imagine. My life is filled with the craziest stories. One of those stories is you had the option of dissecting out your own brain to work on, which required a bone saw to cut through the skull and take the brain out. I was afraid I wasn't up to that task. Or you could use a brain that had already been removed, and most people chose that option. So it was always one group. There was 120 of us in my class. No, actually about 165 or so in my class. It was a big class. The dissection lab was immense. Palmer College of Chiropractic is the Harvard of chiropractic schools. It's the biggest. It's the best. It's in Iowa. It's where the whole thing started by D.D. Palmer, Daniel David Palmer, back in 1895. His son took it over, B.J. Palmer, and turned it into a college. And his son, who was actually the president of Palmer when I was there, and who died, I think, 2 years into my school there, was the last of that dynasty. And he was responsible for taking Palmer as a college and moving it into the forefront of a top-notch learning institution that was recognized worldwide, and moving the chiropractic profession into the next level of sort of medical level perfection, where chiropractic, doctors of chiropractic, DC, doctor of chiropractic, are the only alternate physicians in the world, aside from medical doctors. We are the only ones who have the ability to bill insurance directly. We are what is referred to as a port of entry physician, holistic physician. That means that patients can come directly to us with no referral. It is our responsibility in managing a case to refer a patient out to the medical system if their condition is severe enough or it's a life-threatening situation. We have the training to recognize that and to say, well, you're like beyond me. We need to send you off to a ba or a ba or a ba. Chiropractors have the ability to take x-rays. B.J. Palmer was the very first. Palmer Chiropractic College was the first institute in the world to have an x-ray machine. Chiropractors were the first profession to ever professionally take x-rays of patients. Before even the medical system, chiropractors were first. So it's not unlikely to go to a chiropractor's office and see an x-ray machine there, because chiropractors have been deeply trained in x-ray technology and techniques. I have a separate certificate in x-ray, and we spend hours and hours and semesters looking at x-rays, diagnosing, looking at different diseases, being able to recognize them on x-ray. Chiropractors really are worth their salt. But chiropractors go one step beyond and take protractors and measuring devices and draw lines on the x-rays so that you can see the alignment of every single vertebra and see if it's rotated or tilted. Or chiropractors are a universe beyond what medical doctors are doing with x-rays. Medical doctors are looking for signs of out-and-out disease or fracture or disc bulge, and chiropractors are trained for that too. But chiropractors go way beyond that in the ability to analyze every single vertebra and its positioning so that you can see if it's abnormally putting pressure on the nerve roots, which is the communication network between the brain and all the body parts. If the communication network is compromised, then the healing factors in the autonomic nervous system cannot communicate to the organs and glands and tell them what to do properly and receive signals from them that tells it what's their current state. So the big idea of chiropractors was to open up the communication network by keeping the spine aligned properly so the communication network was open. The fact that it hurts when one of those vertebrae is out, and that pain would go away when you made that adjustment, was in the beginning an incidental thing. It was the door prize from sort of the penalty is pain from having it misaligned and messing up this communication network. And the door prize is the pain goes away when you realign it so that the network is reestablished and the healing forces can continue to make you healthy. That's sort of the chiropractic idea. But when all is said and done, this structure is what calls the shots. The healing forces are deep inside of this structure in the autonomic nervous system, which we'll talk about briefly here. But the amazing characteristics of the fact that there's all of these sort of noodles going around, and there's a standard pattern of noodles to the point where every single person's brain is a variation on a theme, where the major structures here are so always the same that they have names to them, and those names apply from brain to brain to brain. You can see on this brain that this sort of milky white, sort of glistening structure is one of the three membranes called meninges inside the skull. And this particular meninge attaches directly onto the brain, and that's called pia mater. And then attached there, and then there's another membrane, another meninge that attaches to the inside of the skull. That's called dura mater, and that one is a lot tougher fibroelastic tissue than the one attached to the brain. The one attached to the brain, the pia mater, is very delicate, and it's sort of like saran wrap, but porous and liquidy. And the dura mater that attaches to the inside of the skull is much tougher than that. Dura mater means tough mother. So we've got the dura mater attached to the inside of the skull. We've got the pia mater attached right onto the brain. And then in between those two layers is the third layer called arachnoid matter. And arachnoid refers to spider, and the reason it's referring to spiders is because that layer in between looks like spider webs. So there's like it's not another layer that's floating, it's attachments like spider webs that attach between these two, so that if you could shrink down in size and fly through between these two layers, the skull and the brain, you would be going through a network of these like spider web things, sheets of spider webs attached around through. That's called arachnoid matter. And in between these two layers of the skull and the brain, dura mater and pia mater, through that space between where the arachnoid matter is the cerebral spinal fluid. Now, 2 years ago, I did a 3-part series on esoteric anatomy, where I covered many of these things I'm going to be talking about today, but not in the same way I'm going to be talking today. However, the cerebral spinal fluid is of extreme importance. Just like everything else in the body, it's getting double and triple duty, because the body is an ecological system trying to get the most work with the least amount of energy expended. So it always creates every structure in the body to get more than one use. And cerebral spinal fluid is no exception. Cerebral spinal fluid is being pumped around, it's flowing. And the arachnoid mater layer of the 3 membranes is really not understood at all in school. It still is not. When I was going to school, it was a big mystery why there was this third layer that looked like these spider webs in between. Nobody could quite understand it. I got my first hit of understanding when I experienced my first waterbed, which was in the early 80s. The first waterbeds, when you got on this waterbed, the waterbed would just do this like thing. You'd get on the waterbed and you'd lay there, and this whole thing would be doing this thing. You might get seasick as you wait for the water to like calm down and reach it. But anytime you moved, this ripple thing started to do this thing again, and that was very unsettling, and nobody liked the waterbeds. So they solved the problem of this runaway wave thing by building these baffles inside the waterbed. So now we've got this waterbed with these sheets of rubber inside, like walls going down at partitions. And the partitions had various holes in the partitions. So now when you get on the waterbed, these partitions with the holes would allow the water to go through, but the sheet would stop the wave in multiple stations as it went through. So the holes were so the water could go through, but the sheet was so it would stop the wave function. So no more waves and seasickness on the waterbed anymore. And as soon as I saw that, I realized the function of the arachnoid mater. It's to stabilize the cerebrospinal fluid waterbed, so to speak, flowing around the brain, being pumped around the brain and circulating around the brain. The arachnoid mater is to break up wave functions, so we don't have runaway weirdo reactions in the fluid that doesn't serve the brain. And to my knowledge, I'm sort of the only person who's ever figured that out. And I just, once again, I just don't understand it. I mean, yeah, I've got a high IQ that's, way above average. It's gotten me into trouble sometimes when I was a kid. But there are smart people in the world. I mean, some smarter than me. I mean, I just don't understand how things that are so sort of logically obvious miss people who are, quote, really, really smart and intelligent, but sort of stupid in the normal, regular logic realm. So the function of the arachnoid mater is to break up the wave function. And now later research has shown that each one of these layers has other functions of transport and passing through and acting as a barrier for certain kind of molecules and allowing other molecules to come through. There's a certain immune function going on with pia mater that attaches straight to the brain, and things like that we're not going to get into right now. Be that as it may, cerebrospinal fluid, like everything else, has double duty. So part of its function is to protect this semi-gelatinous mass of the brain from an impact injury to the skull. So if you get a big blow to the head, or you're in a car accident, you hit the windshield, your brain is going to be flying inside your skull, and what's going to restrain it is these membranes that are firmly attached to the brain that prevent it. Now, the brain is also hanging in a hammock of extremely tough fibroelastic tissue called the tentoral membrane. So there's a membrane that that splits the brain in half, so that we've got two hemispheres, and there's this super tough wall of membrane tissue down between there. And then we've got this big fissure right here that opens up. And then that membrane comes in this way too. So it's sort of a T-shaped membrane thing that is inside here. It helps the brain stay in place in case it starts to move. So then we've got the pressurized cerebrospinal fluid as a packing material to protect the brain. So that the brain has now got a pressurized fluid to protect it, and the tentoral membrane, and the 3 layers of meninges to protect it from striking the inside of the skull and creating a bruise, which is a bleed. And that's a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, is when the brain actually does strike the inside of the skull in an extremely traumatic event, maybe a car accident or something. And that requires open brain surgery to relieve that pressure, because pressure's got no place to go, and it's building up and it's destroying brain tissue in there. Less than a TBI is a concussion. And concussion puts the brain in a sort of a state of shock and disrupts neural pathways of communication. At any given second, 40% of all the things going on in your brain, all the pathways, are virtual pathways. They're only being used for right now. If you repeat that process over and over again, the brain will start to grow actual physical pathways to transmit that nerve impulses, because we use that function a lot. That's why the more function you use, the more the brain adapts to that and grows pathways to make that job easier. Neuroplasticity. But if you have a big blow to the head, like a concussion, then all those virtual pathways, all 40% of them just evaporate. They're gone. And whatever your brain was up to on, 10 million different levels going on are all evaporated. And now the brain is in a state of shock and confusion. If the blow to the head is big enough, then you disrupt or destroy some of the actual physical pathways, and they're broken and they don't work anymore. And now we've got severe problems, severe concussion problems, where your concentration is really messed up, your memory is really messed up, your ability to remember things or concentrate, or you're messed up and something's wrong with you. And clinically, brainwave entrainment using binaural beats, where you have two tones slightly out of tone, that creates a modulation, and the modulation at a brainwave speed causes brainwaves to entrain there. And when you do it through headphones, it forces synchronicity of the hemispheres. Synchronicity of the hemispheres fixes that problem, because by definition, it immediately causes signals to fire down all these pathways. Just the very thing the brain can't do because it's in a state of shock because of the concussion. So one of the primary treatments for the underlying condition in the brain that has a name on it called concussion is the concept of binaural beats through headphones, forcing synchronicity of the activity of the neural pathways. Now, that same kind of condition of neural pathway interruption you see in other conditions. ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, learning disabilities, autism, epilepsy, depression, PTSD, all of these have that as an underlying condition. And so all of the sort of patients who would come with all these different named conditions, I wouldn't be treating those conditions. I'm treating the primary underlying condition that's a functional anomaly that all of these have their symptoms depending on. So it was not a surprise to me to see people having these major conditions clearing up when you do the right thing under the hood and fix the primary factors that they're all depending on. The magic of the brain, this concept of the sort of quasi-specialization of the right-left hemispheres. The right hemisphere tends to be holographic and artistic and form-oriented, and musical and artistic, and the left hemisphere tends to be logical and mathematical and practical. And remember, this is sort of like a yin-yang symbol, where each of those curly things of the yin-yang has a little circle of the opposite color in the middle, right? That shows that each of the two halves of the yin-yang has a seed of the opposite one within it. So it's the same thing with the brain. The right hemisphere has certain logical functions and mathematical functions, and the left brain has certain artistic functions, and it's not completely black and white. And every single person of humanity is a little variation on the same. So each person a little bit different. Some is bigger, some it's smaller. But the fact that the brain is this sort of organic electrical tissue sort of quantum computer thing that is still a mystery because it's so unimaginably complex. But the fact that it's running on electrical discharges, and there's 900 billion cells with 2.3 trillion connections between them, is just so, it's over the top, really. It's a mind-blowing, organic thing that defies description. And the fact that coming out of this whole thing and its calculations abilities and its ability to do multitasking and layers and layers and layers of things going on at the same time, a powerhouse of sort of CPU power. The electrical discharges and activity, which forms what we call brain waves, the fact that the depolarization of these neurons happen in according to the law of coupled oscillators, that the neurons fire in sequences that cause the next ones to fire and the next ones to fire, that causes a sweep, just like going to a football game and doing the wave, That's how brain waves work. That's why they're called brain waves, waves of depolarization. And for some reason, the speed of these depolarization sweeps is intimately aligned with states of consciousness. So we divide those into beta, alpha, theta, delta, epsilon, gamma, default mode, and all the rest. Each of those brain states is a different depolarization sweep speed. And each of those brain states, according with that speed, is a very distinct state of consciousness. So consciousness, which is sort of ephemeral, and the physicality of neurons firing in your cortex are intimately linked together. Now, according to Einstein and E equals mc squared, E equals m, that energy equals matter, that what appears to be matter with the space around it are both the same thing in a different state, like gas and ice. Both are water. The fact that you can see me here with the space around me, the only reason you can see me is because I got a space around me. But because the space is invisible to the sensors in your eyeball, you think that there's nothing there, but that's not true at all. It's all filled up with vibrational nested standing waves in different frequency channels. We can see this channel, but we can't see the channel in the space around us. So the mystery of consciousness and physical brain structure is always something, and it's something that plays a prominent part in our work with high-tech meditation, right? You can analyze these brainwave patterns in monks who've been meditating for 30 years, and you can use brainwave entrainment to entrain your brainwaves to that pattern. To me, that's high-tech meditation. It means the struggle of somebody trying to explain to you how to meditate, which actually is an impossibility, because what you're trying to explain to somebody is, in order to meditate properly, the part that's hearing the instructions has to let go and evaporate, because big mind has to take over. And this is where the meditation takes place, not here. So this one has to read the books and go to the classes and learn the instructions. And what those instructions are essentially saying is you have to let yourself go and turn off. And you don't know how to do that, and nobody can explain it to you. They have tricks, maybe like a koan. Contemplate what's the sound of one hand clapping. And you're going, what? What does the tongue taste like? That's they're tricks to try to get your brain into a loop so it just blows its fuse or something. But with high-tech meditation, we can take this brainwave entrainment phenomenon with binaural beats that force synchronicity of the hemispheres and entrain your brainwaves to a certain pattern. Look at EEG pictures of high-level meditators that we want to be like them. And what we see is different types of brain states associated with different types of meditation. But among all of those different brain state meditation states, all of them have one thing in common. They all have synchronicity of the hemispheres as part of that picture. So by entraining your brain waves to the Tibetan Buddhist meditation technique, a la the Dalai Lama with this research project at the University of Wisconsin in 2001, where he showed his monks were exhibiting high amplitudes of gamma brain activity, and that's the brain wave associated with that particular type of meditation, and synchronicity of the hemispheres. So now if you wanted to do that type of meditation, you don't have to sit for 30 years. You need to put on a soundtrack that is in training to gamma with binaural beats and headphones that force this, and you stack the deck in your favor for a favorable outcome to take your brain to a gym. Nobody has to explain to you how to get there. This technology puts you there. And now you viscerally are able to experience directly what somebody might be trying to explain to you, what it's like and where you have to go. That's the beauty of the new science of consciousness that we've been exploring since 1982, when I erected my first recording studio and started down this path of entrainment. So this physical structuring of the brain, every single one of these noodles has got some kind of a name, and each one of them does something very specific in how the brain works. It's fairly well mapped out at this point, but there's still, a million layers to discover. But science has really mapped fairly completely what's going on each one of these noodles, and then the noodles in various regions, the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe, and all of these different things interrelate to each other and have pathways of communication. The structure right here is the ventricles. So in the center of the brain, a little bit difficult to visualize, but in the center of the brain are these spaces, like certain odd-shaped caves. And there's 4 ventricles. This is the 4th one down here. This is the 3rd ventricle. This is the right and left lateral ventricles. So there's one on the right hemisphere, one in the left hemisphere. This one's in the center, and this one down here is in the center, goes down into the spinal cord. These ventricles are where cerebral spinal fluid is manufactured. So cerebral spinal fluid is manufactured in the very center in the brain, in these sort of caves. In the ancient texts, these are called, this is called the Cave of Brahma. These are all very high-level spiritual structures in the ancient literature. The esoteric secrets, particularly the kind of stuff that Gurdjieff brought back in the 20s, with deep explanations about all this stuff that nobody had ever heard before. The fact that the cerebral, so inside the Cave of Brahma is, so let's imagine you're in this funny shaped cave here, and on the walls of this cave are these grape-like structures growing, grape-like clusters, and those grape-like clusters are called the choroid plexus, C-H-O-R, choroid plexus. The choroid plexuses spread throughout is where cerebral spinal fluid is manufactured, and it drips out of those grape-like clusters and fills the cave, and then goes down these channels of communication and fills up all the rest of these caves and then those caves connect to the layer between the the two membranes that wrap around the brain, the pia mater against the brain and the dura mater against the skull, and circulates through the arachnoid mater space. So this cerebral spinal fluid is arising in these caves, communicating among each other until they're all filled up, and then communicates out to the between the membranes and down the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is wrapped with those same membranes. So this CSF goes all the way down the spinal cord, out the nerve roots, and the entire nervous system from the inside of the brain to the outside of the brain, all the way down the spinal cord, is filled with the cerebral spinal fluid. Now, the second function of the cerebral spinal fluid is as an electrolyte. Sodium and potassium have opposite charges, and so we have a dipole, which generates electrical tension. But the fact that there's an electrolyte solution that's bathing the brain, the sensitive electrical tissue of the neurons that have to fire electricity, if it's floating in a vat of electrolytic solution, then all those electrical firings are enhanced in their ability by a huge amount. So now the second function of cerebral spinal fluid is to enhance the function of the electrical firings of all the neurons, and to enhance the function of the neurons all the way down the spinal cord. So the entire network gets charged up. If you go back 2 years and look at the 3-part series I did on esoteric anatomy, we discussed the chakras there in the second and the third part, where each of the chakras is associated with an endocrine gland, and the endocrine glands are supplied by sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves, sympathetic from the spinal cord nerve roots and parasympathetic from the vagus nerve. And each of those is associated with one of the chakras. And the only chakra counterpart that is different. So all the glands below the neck, thyroid and the thymus and the heart, is officially now an endocrine gland, not just a muscle pump. It was officially discovered that it produced 2 hormones, so it's really a hormone gland. Heart chakra, pancreas, and sex organs, and all of these glands associated with each one of the chakras. And all of those are about the same. Every single one of those glands produces a hormone directly into the bloodstream and has an instant effect on the body, like adrenaline. Bang, as soon as the adrenaline comes out, heart rate and respiration goes up and blood pressure goes up. Heart rate races. Instant effect on the body. So all of those are about the same. Those chakras are all about the same. But then we get to the brow chakra. And when we look at the ancient diagrams, the sort of petals that come off of each of these chakras, right? 4 and 6 and 12 and 16, right? 4 and 16. And then all of a sudden there's 96. There's a huge mathematical leap. And then there's another huge mathematical leap from 96 to 960, 10 times larger. So I went on exploration from an anatomy and physiology standpoint. Do the glands exhibit a similar massive difference that would be reflected physically? Answer is, of course, yes, that the brow chakra associated with the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland doesn't produce just 1 or maybe 2 hormones, like the adrenals have 2 hormones. Many of them have just 1. The pituitary has a dozen. and its hormones have no effect on the body at all. Whereas all of these have an instant effect on the body, but the pituitary hormones don't have any effect on the body. They target the endocrine glands, right? There's thyroid stimulating hormone. It goes to the thyroid and turns it on, and then its hormones affect the body instantly. So the pituitary is like the conductor of an orchestra, and neck down is the orchestra, and the conductor sends signals to each one of the players and tells it to toot its horn. And so that is significantly different, like you would see reflected in the number of petals. Next question is, what about the pineal gland associated with the crown chakra being 10 times more petals than the brow? Is that reflected in the physiology? And the answer is yes. That the cerebral spinal fluid is the pineal gland is the only endocrine gland that does not secrete its hormone into the blood. All the rest do. Blood is a communication network. But the pineal gland is, the answer is no. So here's the pituitary here. Here's the pineal gland right here. The hypothalamus is right here, where the autonomic nervous system is, sympathetic, parasympathetic. And the pineal gland is in the cave of Brahman. It's in cerebral spinal fluid. So the pineal gland secretes its hormone into the cerebral spinal fluid, not the blood. Cerebral spinal fluid is exactly like blood. It's like blood plasma. You take all the red and white blood cells out, and the fluid that you've got looks exactly like cerebral spinal fluid. You can't tell the difference unless you do a chemical analysis, in which case you find that blood plasma is also an electrolyte that has sodium and potassium. And cerebral spinal fluid is an electrolyte with sodium and potassium. But the ratio of the comparison of the sodium and potassium is exactly reversed in these two. So they're mirror images of each other. So the information that Gurdjieff brought back in the 20s, where he talked about a special gland that had an organ that was an organ of awakening, that had Kunda buffer blocking it, blocking the Kundalini energy from activating it. And the three brain beings on the planet Earth, go back and watch that episode if you haven't seen it, holds true with physiology. That he also talked about the ancients talking about a second inside-out blood circulatory system of sacred blood. And now we see that that would align exactly with cerebral spinal fluid. It's an inside-out mirror image of the blood going through your arteries and veins. The electrolytic solutions are exactly reversed and opposite. It's charging the whole nervous system, as was told by Gurdjieff in the 20s when he came over, that activation of the pineal gland produces a special hormone that charges this second sacred blood and charges the entire nervous system and amps the whole thing up. So something about melatonin, and actually in the 60s, they did research to find out what's happening with such a small amount of LSD, micrograms can cause such a huge change. And the only change they could see was massive levels of melatonin in the blood. So melatonin goes into the cerebral spinal fluid, into the brain, exits out of the brain in the sagittal sinus of a big vein up here at the top of the skull, and enters into the blood to be processed out and detoxified. So eventually melatonin finds its way into the bloodstream through this channel. Under the brain, we have these 12 pairs of cranial nerves. The first cranial nerves are the olfactory nerves for smell. And you can see the third cranial nerve and the fifth cranial nerve and the seventh cranial nerve, facial nerve. Eighth cranial nerve is the acoustic, vestibular acoustic nerve. Ninth cranial nerve is the glossopharyngeal nerve. The 10th is the vagus nerve. So the ninth and the 10th are the two that control the autonomic nervous system and are displayed with the heart rate variability system that I use in my sound healing technology. When I was going to school, these are some of the drawings that I made to learn this whole thing myself, which eventually got sold to fellow students as study guides. It means that it would be very simple to cover over these answers with a sheet of paper so that you could take this test. What is number 68? Right. It's the occipital pole. But here, as a picture of the brain from the top, we can see the precentral gyrus up here at the front, which is the motor cortex, and the postcentral gyrus down here, the sensory cortex. The occipital lobe, the frontal lobes, the temporal lobes over here, parietal lobes further up. Every single noodle's got a name and they all have a meaning. How the brain is situated in the skull, in the turning into the brainstem. So the brainstem extends down to C2. Here's C1, here's C2. Right there is about where the spinal cord begins. There's the pituitary, there's the pineal gland, this is the cerebellum. Here's the hypothalamus, where the autonomic nervous system is. Above that is the thalamus. So the hypothalamus means under the thalamus. The thalamus is two sort of oval-shaped structures, one on the right, one on the left, at the very top of the upper brainstem area. So you can see here is the spinal cord. This whole structure here is the brainstem, divided into three parts: medulla oblongata and the pons, and the upper brainstem structures. Here are all the cranial nerves that come out, 12 pairs of cranial nerves, one of which is the vagus nerve for the autonomic nervous system. You can see that the spinal cord turns into the brainstem and becomes the thalamus, one on the left, one on the right. The thalamus is like the grand central station. Sensory signals are coming up the spinal cord from all the body parts through spinal tracts that are distinct from each other. Pain is one, vibration is another, all the kinds of different senses you can think of, heat and cold. They come up into the thalamus, and the thalamus routes them out to the appropriate areas of the cortex for finer degree of analysis that only the gray matter of the cortex can achieve. This is the gross deciding which kind of information belongs where in the cortex for further analysis. The autonomic nervous system is this triangular zone in the center of the brain, the hypothalamus. It's here, underneath the thalamus. And it looks like this when it's blown up. It's all these little organelles with fancy names. Hanging underneath it is the pituitary gland with direct hard wire wiring from the hypothalamus that tells the pituitary what to do. This structure here, the anterior hypothalamus, this one, is the origin of the parasympathetic nervous system. And the posterior hypothalamus, this one here, is the origin of the sympathetic nervous system. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, this one right here, is the origin of our body clock, circadian rhythms, and is hardwired right into the pineal gland that sets our body clocks and our sleep-waking cycle and a bunch of other things. Blowing this up, you can see the anterior nucleus is the parasympathetic nervous system here, and the posterior nucleus is the sympathetic nervous system here. All of these structures have primary survival functions in the body. When to feel hungry, how to time your body clocks, different kind of important hormones, sexual regulation, when I feel full and when I feel hungry, things like that. Look at this, January 2024. Brainwaves reveal layered activity patterns across the species. This is new discoveries about the brain. It just keeps happening. Researchers discovered that different layers of the brain's cortex exhibit distinct electrical activity patterns, with rapid gamma waves in the upper layers and slower alpha beta waves in the deeper layers. This pattern is consistent across various brain regions and species, including humans, suggesting a fundamental role in cortical function and consciousness. So this means that the brain activity that we all talk about, generating brain waves, is actually 6 layers deep. There are 6 layers of neurons in the gray matter on the outside of the cortex. And these articles that have just been coming through are talking about the fact that they have detected brainwave activity in each layer. So now the brain is 6 times more complex than we ever thought it was. And many of those brainwave layers are communicating with each other and influencing themselves, where the slower brainwaves are the deeper layers and the faster brainwaves are the outer layers, like gamma up here at 40 hertz and delta way down at the bottom layers. And now the fact that we see gamma brain activity that is modulating theta, which I've talked about before, the 2 brainwaves modulating each other, is how the gamma function binds all the sensory information in a wireless communication network outside the wiring diagram of the brain. It's an internet of the brain by a modulation of the outer layer gamma with a deeper layer underneath of theta communicating together. And so now this whole thing is completely more complex in a way that boggles the mind. And it means however magnificent and mind-blowing we thought the brain was with what we already had discovered about it, we now find out it's 6 times at least more complex than we thought. Now, when I went to school, we learned that and memorized these 6 layers of the brain. So, you know, this sort of darker tan is the gray matter. The lighter tan is the sort of white matter. And the gray matter has got 6 layers. Now, the body is the textbook of universal law. And the universal law tends to always center on the law of 3 and the law of 7. Law of 3, positive, negative, and neutral electromagnetic universe, and the law of 7, octaves, sound, the 2 big parts of the yin-yang. That when I was learning this, I was sort of shocked that there were only 6 layers. I would have suspected 7 layers to make an octave. I had the same feeling with the periodic table. I'm going, there's only 6 noble gases, and they go with the chakras. There should be a 7th. I bet you they'll discover a 7th, and 25 years later they did. Now there are 7 noble gases. The same thing with brain waves. I was taught that there's beta, alpha, theta, delta, until I discovered with EEG with patients that there's another one below delta, epsilon. And then they discovered gamma above beta, and hypergamma above gamma, and lambda above hypergamma. All right. And so then they discovered default mode network underneath the epsilon that I had discovered. So that box was broken. And so I'm predicting that they will discover another 7th layer of brain frequencies. I suspect it's there. They haven't discovered it. Give it another 20 years, it'll be there. The cortex's 6 layers show distinct patterns of electrical activity consistent across different brain regions and species. Gamma waves dominate in the upper layers, while alpha and beta are more prevalent in the deeper layers. Imbalances in these layered oscillations could be connected to various brain disorders. It's not just could, it is absolutely 100% associated with different neurological diseases. As we've seen with the default mode network and gamma, multiple research PubMed articles, peer-reviewed journals have been showing that different brainwave anomalies are deeply associated with various named conditions: ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, epilepsy, PTSD, clinical depression, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia. All of those have brainwave anomalies that are functional, not broken brain, functional anomalies in how the brain is working. And once we know what the functional anomaly is, we can entrain the brain back to its normal function using binaural beats and headphones and a sound chair, a sound table to complete that picture, and those conditions respond. Throughout the brain's cortex, neurons are arranged in 6 distinct layers, which can be readily seen with a microscope. A team of MIT neuroscientists have now found that these layers also show distinct patterns of electrical activity, which are consistent over many brain regions and across several animal species, including humans. This is mind-blowing stuff. And various areas of the cortex have different types of cells in those 6 layers. So the sensory cortex, which was the precentral, the postcentral gyrus, the noodle at the back, there's a big division, a big sulcus here, and behind that, those noodles are the sensory cortex. And the one in front is the precentral gyrus with motor cortex. That's what they're referring to here. The sensory cortex and the motor cortex have different types of cells in these 6 layers. The general cortex, or every place else, has a 3rd configuration of brain cells. But the sensory cortex and the motor cortex have everybody's already known that those are very specialized areas of the brain. The primary motor cortex has these special cells in the 5th layer and the 6th layer called the giant pyramidal cells of Betz. Those only show up in the motor cortex, and they are shaped like a pyramid of Cheops, as is the hypothalamus, the zone where the autonomic nervous system is. And in all of the spinal tracts coming up through the spinal cord, when they get to the brainstem zone, that's where they all cross over each other, and 80% cross over to the opposite side, to that hemisphere, 20% go straight. And this weaving of those nerve fibers, of those tracks coming up the spinal cord, that weaving forms a pattern. It's called the decussation of the pyramids. So there's another pyramid of Cheops in the crossing fibers in the upper brainstem. All of this kind of stuff that was reiterated again when Gurdjieff came over with these mind-blowing diagrams. that eventually were shown in anatomical diagrams when I was going to school. I'm thinking, oh my God, that was not a metaphor. That was flippin' real. So the giant pyramidal cells of Betz are the origin of the impulses that make you move your body. This is the origin of the motor cortex. Motor signals coming out of the brain down the spinal cord that make your muscle contract and make your arm move originates from these giant pyramidal cells of Betz. And the motor cortex is the only place where these exist. The universal brainwave pattern involves gamma waves and alpha beta waves, which differ in their frequencies. A first of its kind signal was detected in the human brain. Scientists have identified a unique form of cell messaging occurring in the human brain, revealing just how much we still have to learn about its mysterious inner workings. Excitingly, the discovery hints that our brains might be even more powerful units of computation than we realized. This is another article about the relationship between the 6 layers, and each layer has a different type of brain frequency, and those brain frequencies are modulating each other as a completely new, almost infinite level of variety of magnification of brain power. The concept of brainwaves working together as modulations of each other is only in its infancy of discovery. And what this is going to show us when we begin to look at the brain this way with high-level meditators in states of enlightenment is going to refine our view of what's going on, and that will lead me into the recording studio to refine my whole approach of using multiple layers of binaural beats at the same time to mimic what the brain is showing us, which I already did that with the awakened mind pattern back in 1990. The awakened mind pattern was 15 layers of brainwave frequencies combined together that formed a pattern that was seen so many times in high-level meditators that Maxwell Cade called this the awakened mind pattern and wrote a book about it, and I created soundtracks based on that as a meditation aid. So it really showed that the brain, that consciousness is a pattern of brain waves working together and not just one brain wave here, one brain. This idea of an alpha state or a theta state is sort of a misunderstanding. It means that maximum amplitude activity is in this frequency of alpha, but all the other alphas and thetas and betas and deltas are all there. They're just low amplitudes in certain patterns that form an overall pattern. So once again, we've got this this whole relationship between not only different layers, 6 layers in the cortex, but the cortex relating to the thalamus, relating to the cerebellum, what's called the second brain. New discoveries about the cerebellum is showing that it's got far more duties than they ever thought, that it's an active participant as a second brain in taking on some of the duties of the master cortex and sharing that information back and forth. It's sort of a second computer network that this one can rely on through the thalamus. Plus these layers and zones of activity of neurons working together, where we have modulation of multiple cortical oscillations nesting themselves together and modulating each other. Frequency modulation. FM radio is frequency modulation. So the brain is doing the same kind of thing. Music's universal impact on body and emotion. So the reason I'm bringing this is another, look at this, January 2024. New discoveries about the effect of music on the brain and the functioning of the brain and the impact of music directly into the emotional processing centers of the hippocampus and the amygdala and the brain is For me, as a composer and a musician, I jump up and down with joy. I mean, the idea that now finally modern science is recognizing the power of music to heal and to change consciousness and to reach deeper states of ourselves, and that this is like ancient knowledge. We've all known this in every culture on earth since the beginning of time. The power of music to change consciousness, to access spirituality and to heal. It's only now being discovered in neuroscience. A recent study reveals that music's emotional impact transcends cultures, evoking similar bodily sensations globally. Researchers found that happy music energizes arms and legs, sad tunes resonate in the chest. This cross-cultural study, involving 1,500 participants from the West and Asia, links music's acoustic features to consistent emotions and bodily responses. The findings suggest that music's power to unify emotions and movements may have played a role in human evolution, fostering social bonds and community and empathy and things like that. Music can be felt directly in the body. When we hear our favorite catchy song, we are overcome with the urge to move to the music. Music can activate our autonomic nervous system and even cause shivers down the spine. So music activating the autonomic nervous system is a definition of biotuning. That's exactly what we're doing. We're using sound frequencies to activate the autonomic nervous system and rebalance it at its core, the master computer program that tells all systems what to do. Music evokes similar emotions and bodily sensations in Western and Asian listeners. Sad, scary, tender, aggressive. How crazy is this? Happy, danceable. It's amazing, really. Wow. The fact that they're mapping it this accurately. Ripples of recall. Brainwaves play a key role in memory. Researchers have advanced our understandings of the neuronal basis of spatial memory. Their research reveals that during spatial memory tasks, different types of nerve cells activate in unison, coordinated by brainwaves known as ripples. In addition to place and object neurons, researchers observed hippocampal brainwave ripples that also occurred during the memory task, presumably playing a crucial role. So this concept of the hippocampus, which is the emotional memory zone, it's a curved structure on either side of the brain that wraps right around the hypothalamus, hardwired into the hypothalamus. It means that my memories of emotions, my emotional trauma memories, are located there. At the end of that curl is the amygdala, where emotional processing takes place. Things that happen to me emotionally are processed here and then inserted into the memory of this loop, which is tied into the autonomic nervous system. That means my emotional states have direct access, hardwired into the functioning of my organs and glands. That's how come we can have physical symptoms that have an emotional cause. So here's the hypothalamus, here's the thalamus, here's the hippocampus, and here's the amygdala. So ripples in the hippocampus, ripples of brain activity, a special type of brainwave is showing up in the emotional processing center that they're calling ripples, ripples of activity. Sleep. I mean, there's all these complex activities that the brain has to do. There's all kinds of duties it's got to accomplish. But periodically it has to rest and clean itself out and defrag the hard drive and rework the CPU and all that kind of stuff. Clean the shrapnel out for the next day and wash out the debris that has come from neuroprocessing. Sleep is what that's all about. How memory is consolidated in sleep is something that has been in the news now for a number of years. Sleep significantly bolsters our brain's ability to consolidate complex associations within episodic memories. Sleep not only strengthens weak connections between different elements of an event, but also fosters new links among previously unconnected aspects, enhancing the process known as pattern completion, or what I call pattern recognition. This demonstrates the importance of sleep for completing partial information and processing complex events in the brain. There's a time at night during sleep when memory consolidation takes place, which tracks right with the fact that studying something just before you go to bed and go to sleep is a greater benefit from being able to memorize it. It also says a lot about what we've got. One of the projects on our shelf for many years has been sleep learning. These kind of research reports are showing which specific which type of brain activity is directly associated with this information consolidation in the memory cortex. And it's non-REM sleep. It's theta, but it's not the dreaming portion of theta. So we can improve memory during sleep. There's something called sleep spindles, which only happens in theta brain activity. Links memory consolidation process to sleep spindles, indicating their crucial role in integrating complex associations and memory. So sleep spindles is something that shows up during the theta portion of sleep before you start the REM sleep of dreaming. There's a zone of non-REM sleep, and special things happen there, something called sleep spindles and K spikes, K complexes. Those are unique to this non-REM sleep zone, and now we're seeing that that's where memory consolidation takes place, and that's what those sleep spindles mean. It's the brain doing some kind of processing of organizing memory in its place. The research suggests that the ability to integrate and complete memories of complex events provides an evolutionary advantage in understanding our environment and predicting future events. It's part of what gave us an edge in our evolutionary progress as a species. The fact that REM sleep and non-REM sleep, so REM sleep is dreaming, non-REM sleep is consolidation. This is sleep spindles right here. And K complexes, like here, are very specific things that show up, and now we know what they mean. So this idea that sleep spindles in non-REM sleep in theta in the brain waves are aligning and modulating with ripple brain patterns in the hippocampus, the emotional memory, is linking brain and emotional processing centers together at night during sleep in the memory, quote, cortex of the emotional center. Also during sleep is flushing the brain of waste. A new study unveiled a crucial role of sleep, brain waves facilitating the cleansing of the brain by flushing out waste. This discovery not only underscores the brain's non-dormant state during sleep, but also highlights a sophisticated system where neurons' synchronized activity powers the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, effectively removing metabolic waste and potentially neurodegenerative disease-causing toxins. This insight opens up possibilities for enhancing brain cleaning processes to combat neurological diseases, improve sleep efficiency, and hinting at a future where optimized sleep could lead to better health outcomes. We've already been on this track now for years. The idea of where our sound healing technology is going. It's going into the cloud, it's going into apps, it's going to 24-hour monitoring of your body processes with simple devices you wear. And one of those would be sleep. Abnormal sleep problems create underlying health issues that make it more difficult to fix with biotuning. The system gets resistant to being able to respond if the sleep cycle is not correct. So there are many kind of apps out there that analyze your sleep cycle, but nobody's doing anything about it. We would be able to analyze on the fly your whole sleep cycle and send signals back down that would normalize it on the fly based on this kind of research. Cerebral spinal fluid surrounding the brain enters and weaves through the intricate cellular webs, collecting toxic waste as it travels. So here's another triple function of cerebral spinal fluid. Waves of fluid. There's a certain section of sleep where brain waves tend to almost disappear and go into low amplitude, and this hyper pumping of the cranial pump mechanism starts to really move huge waves of cerebral spinal fluid through the system to wash all the debris out. So it's another function of the cranial pump and another function of cerebral spinal fluid. Mapping the brain's dysfunctionome. Researchers achieved a breakthrough in mapping the brain's dysfunctome. Key dysfunctional circuits linked to disorders like Parkinson's, dystonia, obsessive compulsive disorder, Tourette's syndrome. This is exactly the kind of thing that we've been doing for years with brainwave entrainment with headphones. In other words, restoring the normal function of brain activity and brainwave activity under the hood with brain entrainment clinically, using specific frequencies derived from analyzing the autonomic nervous system's ability to reach homeostasis, balance of the sympathetic parasympathetic, which is a prerequisite for healing in the body. When certain connections in the brain do not function correctly, disorders such as Parkinson's, dystonia, OCD, Tourette's may result. Targeted stimulation of specific areas in the brain can help alleviate symptoms. And targeted stimulation is precisely what we're doing with specific frequencies, specific brainwave entrainment frequencies, and the use of binaural beats that cause synchronicity of the hemispheres. And we've been up to this now for 30 years. Using these results, they were able to identify specific brain circuits that had become dysfunctional in each of the 4 disorders that we just mentioned a second ago. The universal brainwave pattern involves gamma waves and alpha beta waves, which differ in their frequencies, as we said, in the interaction between the 6 layers of neurons in the cortex. This idea that neurons in the brain are communicating in layers with each other is just mind-blowing to me. It's like, wow. In one fell swoop, the complexity of this whole thing is 6 times more than what we ever thought it was. And we're not even talking about the connectome or the neural pathways of connections or any of this more intensely amazing connectome of nodes that work together. And then, of course, it's not lost that, the body is the textbook of universal law. What's going on in the brain with this connectome looks exactly what's going on in the universe as a whole in its connectome, which pushes the possibility in many articles I've been seeing as scientists are questioning, could the brain be a giant, could the brain and the cosmos be a fractal reflection of each other, and the cosmos itself be a brain. Of course, in the esoteric circles, that's a foregone conclusion for thousands of years. Not even a question. The fact that what's going on in the brain is reflected in the macro universe, and that our consciousness stands directly at the center of all the things that are going on. Infinitely larger and infinitely smaller, we stand in the middle. Consciousness manifests the brain in order to process this whole thing and create the movie. Fractal networks. Neurons form fractal networks. And those fractal networks extend out into the universe and represent themselves there in fractal repetitions in the cosmos at large and in the quantum field at the other end. These types of patterns that you see in blood vessels and in the lungs and in leaves and in space photos of rivers on the earth and in neural patterns of the cortex, these sort of fractal hyperbolic geometry of networks in all forms that form in all systems, earth systems, cosmic systems, physical body systems, brain systems, quantum systems, all exhibit similar type of geometries. Unveiling the weaving fractal network of connecting neurons. I mean, it's just more and more of it. It's in the news. It's happening now. Neurons and dendrites form a fractal network on top of a large electrode in the left side of the image. Wow. Fractal brain networks support complex thought, amazing lightning storm of connected patterns. Understanding how the human brain produces complex thought is daunting given its intricacy and scale. The brain contains 100 billion neurons that coordinate activity through 100 trillion connections. And those connections are organized into networks that are often similar from one person to the next. Dartmouth study has found a new way to look at brain networks using the mathematical notion of fractals to convey communication patterns between different brain regions as people listen to a story. And then those connections go between people, and you get enough people aligned together in a fractal connection, you can affect the macro fractal and the micro fractal. The central core idea behind these live streams, what we're up to here. Brain connectivity breakthrough, similar neural network patterns discovered across diverse species. It's us and it's animals and it's little creatures. It's cosmic. It's quantum. It's connected with one another in group mind. Where what's going on in the brain connects out into the cosmos and connects with other brains and other species in a grand fractal network. If we can tap into that network, we can influence it. Study finds a connection between the universe and the human brain. Duh, we are connected to something bigger. Networks in the brain and universe are so similar that we can only conclude that there has to be some kind of universal laws governing all structures found in the natural world. We like to believe that this is a sign of something bigger at play. Read the 4,000-year-old text from India. Tells you the same thing. It's all one big, gigantic, networked fractal hologram, and we're in the middle of it. And the beauty is that we can use the new science of consciousness and brain entrainment and binaural beats and synchronicity of the hemispheres to tap right into the middle of it and alter everything that's going on. the brain and the cosmos connected together in ways that have never been possible before. Group mind linking, connecting with the sort of the infinite mind of the Godhead. We talked about this the last time. That's what we're up to now. Headphones and mind linking. The madness of that idea means that it's probably true, right? But as a grand esoteric scientific experiment that we are all willing to partake in, because there's no downside to this, it can only get better. Here we go. Thank you all. So happy St. Patrick's Day, which to me means someone who had a vision and spirit and followed that path and achieved sainthood because of it, following the impetus that comes from the heart, having the courage to follow that, and knowing that the universe will have your back. Thank you all for being here. It's my great pleasure and joy to be with you. I'm going to leave the chat open for a while, as usual. So thank you all for being here, and I'll see you next Sunday.